I repeatedly, as chair, brought in parties into my office and asked them the why questions. And the reason is, the questions at the beginning, the how much questions, produce acceptable solutions, but the best solutions I found were the wise solutions that came when we could compare whys, because we could find ways that worked well. A conflicting interest is that kind of interest that is, that is, as it's good for you, it's bad for me. As it's good for me, it's bad for you. Complementary interests are those trades, and there were probably the trades, in this case, between the rind and the pulp. That's a very valuable commodity. When we get to those underlying interests, this is my law student who wanted to go to Florida for vacation because his wife had gotten the family to go to Colorado the last 3 years and he was bored. He wanted me to figure out what I could do to get him to Florida. He said, look, if we do it this way, we're going to haggle and we're going to cut the baby in half and we're going to go to Arkansas, and I don't want to do that either. Why do you want to go to Florida? I want to fish in the ocean and see good professional sports. Why does your wife like to go to Colorado? She likes to be up in the air, clean air, and she wants to ski. I said, then in that case, your interests are fishing in the ocean, good professional sports, and skiing on a mountain. Find a place in America where you can do that, and they went to the Seattle area. And by the way, Seattle is better than Colorado and Florida for both the wife and the husband. Colorado has an angry husband who feels ignored. Florida has a wife who's not particularly comfortable in those circumstances and feels dictated to a husband who said, we're going to go here because it's my turn that you be miserable because you've made me miserable the last 3 years. Seattle is something, by the way, that my law student's wife came back and said, I wish we could problem solve like this more often. And you stopped being a lawyer to argue me into where you want the family to do things and negotiate with me as to what my interests are. Seattle is better in part because you have a happy wife and a husband, and because you've modeled good decision making. There has to be a reason to do a deal. And generally speaking, it's this. The deal can do something for me that the present cannot necessarily do. I might be able to get this bill next session, but I can't get it this session unless I do a deal. I might be able to take nothing this year and get everything I want next year, or I can take half a loaf this year if I do a deal. Without that motivation, there is no reason for parties to agree. So if we want to engender an interest in the other side to making a deal, we have to be able to identify for them something that is in it for them, something that advances their interests, something they could get only by doing a deal with us that they couldn't get someplace else. It has to do with the alternatives we were talking about earlier. I have control, you have control of my fate, but I have control of your fate. And we can have mutually assured destruction, or we can have a deal. But we have to be able to show the other side that there's something in it for them. We had a deal problem about workers' comp about 20 years ago now. Premiums were going up, rocketing up at 15% a year, while the benefits were the 47th lowest in the country. We had a big knockdown governor's summit. I learned 4 big rules that people cared about. Change the doctor choice rule, go to managed care, index benefits so that they grow by the cost of living rather than legislative action, and safety committees. And business said yes to 2 of them and hated no 2 of them, and labor said yes to the opposite 2. This is the normal legislative package. And you look to try to beat the other side and cram it down their throat. And if you've got a one-sided legislature, you can expect that to be the agenda. However, if it's a close match, the chance you're going to get through this session with exactly the dynamic as it is today, because they can cancel each other out for progress, is pretty great. So the question that I asked the labor people were, what are your priorities? And I got the banking director to ask the same thing of business, and this is what business said. These are how important the issues were for them. And these were how important the issues were for labor. There's a deal there, and you need to be able to see it. You have to give up something, and what do both parties have to give up? They have to give up their 3rd and 4th priorities. They don't get their 3rd and 4th priorities. But what do they get? they get their top priorities this session passed through with a bill that passed 41-7, and the only non-voting members are their 7 practicing lawyers who didn't want to be part of this deal because they didn't think it was very good for lawyers. It was good for business, it was good for injured workers, it wasn't good for lawyers, and they voted no. What we discovered was that instead of the conflicting interest of I get everything, you get nothing, that there was a trade that was good across that bowed section of the complementary interest. Then we kept going, and we found out that getting your rights over the phone from the workers' comp court was preferable to both sides. Labor got the advice for free, and business got it so that the laborer got their advice from somebody other than a lawyer trying to sue the business and talk them into suing them. They got a neutral third party. That was good for both sides. They found out that if they ran the computer tapes, they could discover which businesses didn't have workers' comp. Labor wanted to know that because those businesses were in danger of leaving somebody without protection. And business wanted to know it because the legitimate businesses were paying for workers' comp, and they wanted to know which of their illegitimate competitors weren't paying so we could capture and get them and make them pay for workers' comp. It was good for both sides. Didn't have to be traded. It was a joint gain. Informal dispute resolution was faster and cheaper. Both sides liked it. You didn't have to trade for that. And getting the dangerous companies to pay more, labor liked it because it incentivized safety. And most companies, 80% of them, have very clean records for workers' comp. It's the other 20 that are dangerous. And if you treat all of them alike, safe companies pay a lot more than dangerous companies. And there are 80% of them that'd be happy to make the dangerous companies pay to incentivize better practices. What they didn't realize, so all of those didn't have to be traded. They were good for both sides. They were shared interests. So, in addition to the conflicting interests, which was get away from that I get everything, you get nothing, you got to the complementary interests by trading across the priorities. Then you got to the shared interests by finding things that are good on both sides. If you are locked in a tug-of-war joint gain situation, then I think as staff, you want to be able to prepare fair norms, fair standards, and fair processes. As staff, we want to, when we're faced with fighting on this scale, we want to be able to suggest fair norms, fair standards, and fair, for example, equal treatment, contribution. In other words, I spend in 80%, you put in 20%, comes time to divide the profits. It should be 80-20, not 50-50. That's contribution. Reciprocity, fair market, knowing the market's good, what are they doing in other states, what do they do in the federal government, need, those are all fair norms. Fair standards are things, external sources of information, like appraisals, new or tax value, new minus depreciation, Kelly's Blue Book, comparable sales. But in our business, it's suggestions from Brookings or some institute, it's other states, it's the federal government, it's any working model that we can bring to bear that can show a working solution. And on fair processes, mediation, arbitration, divide and choose, these are all ways to get around the problem of somebody giving in and somebody getting nothing and the other party compelling. One piece of things that I think is valuable for staff is what I call the single text process. You'd find it in Roger Fisher's book. You sit down, you listen to all parties, you write a proposal. And then instead of saying, who's with me, you say, tell me what's wrong with this. That's a very different question. When you invite criticism, you get ideas as to what is wrong, so you redraft. So you give them that proposal and they come back, oh, no, that's too much, 10's too much, or 10's too little, ought to be higher. Somebody says 15. There's a 2, it ought to be higher, blah, 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 blah. Well, you know, that would be okay, but if it was premised on this trigger over here, that X thing, oh, and that part in the bottom, we need to cross that out, that's a bad idea. That's what you get after you do a single text procedure and you ask for criticism. But here's what you do know. That first line, it works. The third line, it works except for that number. The fourth line, it works except for that number. The fifth line, it works, and so do the same. You now have 75% of this, if we can change some other numbers, that does not have objection. That means we got 75% of a bill. So we go back in and we take these ideas and we made our changes. We redraft again, we change the numbers, we come back, and we increase the acceptability, and then the chairman says, this is as good as I can do. Who's with me? Now you've had your input, now you've had your changes, now you've modeled the bill, and only then are you asking for commitment. You don't ask it for the first thing out of your mouth. You ask for criticism, and then move towards solving the criticism, and then ask for commitment. I used to do this in the banking chair. My staff member, Bill Marino, became an expert in using the single text procedure. We did it all the time, and it moved parties to improving a bill without being asked to commit to it. But as they saw the improvement of the bill, they could go back to their group and get authority so that at the end they could come to the table and say yes. Here's what I think we've discussed so far today. I think we've discussed whys before we get to how much. We need why, the question why, along with the question how much. We want our underlying interests as well as our positions. Secondly, we want to trade across differences for maximum outcomes. Third, we want to use fair process norms and be able to suggest them when they might be available so that people believe that the system is fair. Fourth, we want to use objective criteria, information, market data, market standards that we can inject. These are the standards that would say to a third party that some party is being legitimate. This is the framework by which they would ratchet up that idea and conclude that it was reasonable or not. And lastly, I genuinely believe, and we didn't talk about this much, we want to build trust through authentic communication. And that means say what you mean and mean what you say. Be reliable. Reliability in the congruence between words and deeds is, in my estimation, the hallmark for legislative trust building. It's a pleasure to be with you. I was surrounded by staff for 28 years. I found the staff to be incredibly helpful, incredibly dedicated, and to that extent, I want to say I appreciate and know how much talent and skill, how much trustworthiness there is in this room. And I hope my colleagues who are still there use you to the best of your abilities because they will be well rewarded. Thank you for your time. Thank you for spending this time together. If you get a chance, come to LMSI or something for NCSL. But if you'd like to contact me directly, my name is David Landis. I'm the Urban Development Department Director for the City of Lincoln. My email is dlandis2, that's the number 2, at unl.edu, and you can email me there. Good luck.